Okay, well, bands that I certainly am very familiar with, and I know that Matt and Josh might not have been as familiar with this specific album. We're going into the world of Metallica, Kill 'Em All. Matt, where does Kill 'Em All fall in the best ever albums view of Metallica's canon?
Yep, Kill 'Em All comes in at number 86 on best ever albums in the 1980s. Number 8 in 1983, number 563 of all time. It is Metallica's 5th highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. So we're going to cover all of the other ones in future episodes. It's not on Rolling Stone.
Well, after we get to like Load, I don't think we're going to be covering anything like that.
The ones that are ahead of it. And Justice for All, Metallica, gotcha. Ride the Lightning, and Master of Puppets. We will cover all of those. Yep. And Metallica comes in number 41 in overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. So, gotcha. John, I think you go first here.
Well, is it safe to say that nothing we've listened to so far on the run up to this point really sounds like exactly like Metallica? I think it's always kind of jarring to me to like think about this album coming out in 1983 and what it's walking into, because I think it's recognizable as metal, right? Mm-hmm. But what metal is in 1983 is a very different thing than I think even we had been weaned to think of metal by the time we were 10 or 12, right, in the early 90s. And that's because this is still thrash metal Metallica. I mean, they are playing hard, they're playing fast. This is still Cliff Burton Metallica, so you've got way more prominent bass than you get in the later 80s. I think notoriously they actually turned down the bass post Cliff Burton on One as almost a passive aggressive deal, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, when we get to that album. But yeah, there's a whole bass instrumental, Anesthesia, on this one that's just Cliff Burton, basically doing a guitar solo on the bass on it, and it's awesome. I'd like to point out, you get sort of, in my opinion, the first three sort of, if you're making a Metallica completist track, I mean, certainly Seek and Destroy is going to be upper echelon, Metallica single, and then you've got Hit the Lights and Four Horsemen as well, which I think are, if you made a top 20, top 25 Metallica songs where you're doing a career retrospective, they probably show up there as well. I think it's important to also mention that Dave Mustaine is still in the group at this point too.
Megadeth
and had co-writing credits. So this is the James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, Dave Mustaine, and Cliff Burton version of Metallica for those that are trying to keep track of their personnel, because obviously Mustaine gets booted out after this and Cliff Burton tragically dies, and so there's different people being added on along the way, and it's kind of down to just James and Lars by the mid 80s.
Quick cleaning here. I think Mustaine did the demos, but the actual recording for this record was Kirk Hammett. He's playing guitar on this record.
Right. That's a good point, Matt. He wrote like a bunch of the songs on this album, I guess is what I'm like. He wrote Four Horsemen, I know, if I remember correctly.
He's credited co-writing Four Horsemen, Jump in the Fire, Phantom Lord, and Metal Militia. So
if you hear him, you'll hear that he gets like it's shared kind of, but I think he's very much he's always said that he's written more than
it's
he
like
did.
Is it one of those? Is it one of those things where Lars like wrote a line in the Four Horsemen, so he gets a writing credit?
Well, it's like it's hard because you've got like some strong personalities, right? In James Hetfield,
really? I didn't know that.
And Lars and Dave Mustaine, right? And so, who is the person who's telling you the real truth? Because Lars kind of says no, and then Mustaine's like, well, yeah, no, because you're not writing anything, and then James kind of like tries to straddle the fence, right? And at this point in time, I mean, obviously, if you've got a virtuoso player in Metallica at this point, it's probably Cliff Burton on bass. I mean, he's the guy at this point. He's by far the best bassist Metallica's ever had. And they've had other good ones. Jason Newsted's a good one. They've got Robert Trujillo, who was in Ozzy's band, I think, is there. So it's not they didn't have other ones, but Cliff Burton is kind of special in terms of his sound. When you can be a bassist in a metal band and stand out, that's really saying something, right? Because that's not really usually what your lane is. But that's just a really long way of saying that, if Run DMC was kind of creating the template for what hip hop was going to be, right? Culturally, Metallica in some ways was creating the template of a So how would we describe Metallica, right? They play faster than almost anybody else playing. They're in the first group band. That's the first thing to say. They also, it's decidedly for men played with testosterone would be the other end. You know, this is, I don't know if this is like a female space in the 80s at all. And it's like t-shirt and jeans. You are not getting like the soaring vocals of Bruce Dickinson or, you know, Hellbent for Leather, Judas Priest, or, you know, the Holy Diver, you know, like the tail, even like the Led Zeppelin, and all of that is largely sucked away. If this has forefathers in terms of the sound, it's kind of like early Black Sabbath. It's sort of a brutal, male, heavy, dark theme. But unlike, you know, Sabbath, who kind of like sludges it up, right? This is decided to play at like, you know, speed 10, you know, podcast at 4x, you know, version of the sound.
This is more akin to the hardcore stuff that we've listened to, I think, in terms of attitude and you know, male space. We've brought that up before to what you're saying.
Well, exactly. And I would say, it's kind of like, you know, there's always the punk and the metal and the conflict there, but I think this owes as much to sort of what punk is in terms of the stripped down nature of it. And I'm not going to say amateur because these guys can play, right? But the idea that you can just be a dude, you know, and you don't have to be some sort of star to do this. It's hard to imagine because of how big Metallica gets in the 90s. And, you know, we feel like we know so much, but Metallica was kind of like the ultimate, like, anonymous guy metal band in the 80s, because I think the idea that, oh, you've got James and Laura, it was like they're fans, right? But for the average person, Metallica is Metallica unit, right? Not necessarily these, you know, big front man, you know, name that you drop, or, you know, the guitar player who's flashy, who stands out. Like when you think of Metallica, they're more of like a unit and a brand. You know, like, who are you going to see? I'm going to see Metallica. You know, it's not like I'm going to see Mick and Keith, right? Or Eddie Van Halen. Or it's like, no, you're going to see Metallica. You know, you're going to see all of them. You're going to see, you know, the deep cuts and the forefront tracks. So, yeah, I enjoy this album. I mean, obviously, it's hard to analyze this album without the totality of what came after it, because to me, each Metallica album in the 80s, it's like those old, what were they? The cootie catchers, Matt? Like the things you'd scratch, you know, you'd push it together, right? And it would give you different things. And I felt like each time it gives you a different, you know what I'm talking about when I say
cootie
that?
Catchers?
No.
You'd hold it in, so like, remember you'd hold it's like a thing you'd put on your hand, right? And you squeeze it and it would, like, you could open up the layers on it to different things. Do you guys have any idea what I'm talking about or no?
Is that what it was? I'll Google it. Is that what it's called? It sounds dirty.
No, but you know what I'm talking. Do you know what I'm
get
talking
arrested
about?
for that, can't you?
It's like a paper thing where there were just different like panels and stuff. Yeah.
Oh, you're
talking called cootie catchers where I was. I don't know. They probably had like 3,000 different names.
Oh yeah, all right. Yeah, like I remember middle school girls doing this shit to tell me who I was going to marry.
Yeah, that's not what I called them. What did I call them? I don't remember.
Yeah, but I mean, the same people who weren't listeing to Metallica were making these things, right? But
Yeah,
I guess
yeah.
the
Yes,
analogy
right.
that I'm
Yes, I don't know anybody that made one of these things that
Yes.
that was bumping Kill 'Em All.
So it's an unusual analogy, but what I'm going with is when you do it, each time you would do that, it was always variable, right? And each time you could do it so that as you peeled off the different stuff, it had like layers under. I didn't want to use the peeling the onion analogy. So like basically what I'm saying is with each Metallica album in the 80s, there's another layer, but there's also a similarity in it. So you're kind of getting the same.
Right.
You could have a different favorite version of Metallica, but underneath it, there's an overwhelming Metallica-ness to it that I think that's why the Black Album, and we're not going to get there for a while, the Black Album sort of transcends it, right? And by design, they do it. But through the 80s, Metallica is unmistakably Metallica, but depending, much like that device, right, where you do it and it would be the same kind of question, but you get a different answer each time. That's kind of how Metallica albums in the 80s are for me. It's like which one you like sort of says there's a randomness for me in terms of the mood I'm in or when it hits me. And so my favorite 80s Metallica album changes regularly. This one doesn't usually get in there for me because I do feel they're not a finished product yet. But I will say as a guitar album and certainly as a bass album, they might get as good, but I don't know if they get quite as heavy as they are here. So, and that's what I really liked about this album. It's brutal, but in a way that's still very listenable, which is the gift of Metallica, right? That they can be ultra heavy, but also mainstream enough that they can sell millions of copies without really any mainstream airplay at all, which in the 80s they didn't have, so until one maybe in the end of the 80s, but yeah.
Metallica, the cootie catcher of rock and roll.
Yeah.
I just called them fortune tellers back in the day.
Fortune teller, yeah. I hope I explained it. So anyway, I got lost in the weeds there.
Oh, you just Google it; you'll see it right away.
Yeah.
I had not heard it be called. I don't know what they were called. They were just paper things that kids did when they were bored in class.
I think I can still make them. Anyway, Metallica, Kill 'Em All. I loved it. It's come for the guitar, stay for the bass. It's blistering guitar. It's pounding drums. It's melodic, but kind of stripped down also. It's James Hetfield's voice hasn't gotten as deep yet, or he's a little screamier, a little screechier than he is later on. Probably because he's a lot younger.
Well, and he was early into his alcoholism, not later into it. So yeah.
So that affects it. All of the pieces are here for the Metallica that became more famous and kind of, I don't know. Are they don't they become like the metal statesmen later on when they get older?
I mean, they kind of have taken on that role.
Yeah.
So yeah.
In their battles against streaming music and their documentaries that we've seen and things like that.
Let's leave that away. Let's revel in what Metallica was in the 80s as opposed to what they were in the late 90s.
Yeah, in some ways this is like almost like a purer form of metal. This is the iron ore in the mine metal.
That's maybe a better analogy than the cootie catcher. Yeah.
It's a propulsive. It's like it hits right in your chest when you're listening to it. It's but at the same time it draws you in, and I find it very listenable in a way that some of the hardcore that we've listened to wasn't. I don't know exactly what it is. They're singing. I think there's a bit more melody here. I think the fact that they're still based in the kind of the 4-part group with the guitar and drums and bass, they're still around that instrumentation versus like the screaming being kind of the singular identifier, as it is in hardcore. And the musicianship, I mean, that's the other thing. They are good musicians. I think you don't have to be necessarily the best musician in a hardcore band, as a lot of them admittedly said when creating those bands. So I think that musicianship's here. So that is the other appeal. And it's just, it's like the ultimate in terms of music to get your energy up for me, and to put you in, to get the adrenaline pumping, is what I'm trying to say. There's a lot of good songs on here. Actually, they're all very solid. This is a very solid album overall. You will get the idea of who Metallica is right away by listening to this album, and Hit the Lights starts. Four Horsemen is, I think, a pretty popular song now, although it wasn't a single I saw of the album when it came out, which I thought was interesting.
It sounds remarkably also like the early Iron Maiden before Bruce Dickinson comes in. We didn't really do Killers or self-titled, but if you kind of want to know what early Maiden sounded like, but sped up a little bit, Four Horsemen's a good corollary.
Yeah, Jump in the Fire, which is the 4th track, I think that is kind of the epitome of what I'm trying to convey. If you were listening to this album, it just brings the guitar, brings the energy, and it brings the fire, I should say, too. I really like Anesthesia. That sounds, for some reason, that sounds like video game music to me, but like in a good way. That would later bring, I think that video game music would later kind of riff on. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but that came to mind for me, and I like when the drums kick in on that song. Whiplash, my note said, "This is a good song." So that's really
short, concise, accurate.
Yes. And then, unlike some of the kind of imagery that we've talked about around metal with Dio and Black Sabbath and, kind of the dark mysticism and spirituality, they have a little bit of that on here with like Phantom Lord, the preoccupation with the devil that would later be used against metal bands. That's mentioned here, but it's kind of light on that as well. So I think that's another differentiation between other metal that we've listened to. And
and I mean, they're talking about their anger and their depression, which I think is another like big piece of Metallica that they connected. When you're used to listening about ghouls and supernatural, and then you've got this band that's playing heavy, and they're like, I'm pissed and I'm depressed, and especially if you struggle to channel emotions, it's like, angry, sad, happy, and they leave out happy and just do it. It's like Metallica in some ways is like a whole group of people's therapist from the 80s in some ways. So
yeah, and that's a good point. I think that's the other big key difference between them and other metal bands, and also the other linkage between that and hardcore too, is that was always based around people's angers and disaffection and a place in the world, and they're bringing that here as well. So point being, I really like this album. It's great. I have heard it before. I will have to, it's been a while since I've listened to Metallica though, so I'll be interested to see where I fall in the albums that I respond to the most, where I am. John said he liked, was different depending on the day. So I'll be interested to see where the sweet spot is for me, but I enjoyed this for sure.
Yeah, I think I said last week when we covered Dio that was kind of my metal, that was, like, oh, this is the metal that I respond to. And I still think that that's true, but this album kicked ass. This album I liked way more than I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to find this, for whatever reason, a harsher listen. Part of that was because I did see Metallica recently, a couple months ago. They headlined Boston Calling. And I had seen them before, and they did play a lot of stuff that I didn't know. I mean, Cards on the Table, the only album that I really knew coming into tonight or this week was the Black Album, which I know is not
most famous.
It's not real. I'm air quoting right now. It's not real Metallica. It's popular Metallica, which, it is what it is. But that's the album that I knew. And
that's
so I remember
Enter Sandman, right?
Correct. Yeah. Nothing else matters, and so.
In this case, the 80s matter, Matt, for the totality of things.
The 80s do matter, John. And and when they played, I remember liking them they're insane. I mean, still Kirk Hammett, like the musicianship is incredible, and they're still nailing all these songs. But I did
except
find
for Lars, he's not always great, but the rest of them, yeah.
Well, this night they were all
okay.
Awesome. It sounded great. And but I remember going, man, I just don't know if this is like, I like them and I appreciate them. I just don't know if it's my thing. I don't know. Maybe I just needed to be a little bit more familiar with what they were doing, because I really like this album. And a couple things stood out. You guys mentioned some punk. There's other things that this is coming from. This is, to me, is an extension of what is it? Motorhead, right? Which was a very fast, kind of aggressive type of playing, and so that.
But more divorced from the blues. Would you not agree with that? Like,
oh,
Motorhead
absolutely.
Still had a grounding in the blues. This,
but
doesn't
it was
really show.
But in terms of like how it had a punk ethos to it, it was fast, right, and it was aggressive and loud. That's what this is. So I thought that was this is kind of an extension of that. And it does have similarities with, kind of the aggression and anger and what have you of hardcore. But the main difference here is just, this is riff heavy. These riffs are awesome, right? And you said a little bit, Josh, there's melody, and there's it's not an overly melodic type album or record, but there's enough melodic parts going in here that keep me interested, who, as someone that really likes melody. And that starts with just the really great riffs that are in here, even just smaller parts. Like there's like the Four Horsemen stood out. It was the first one that had this in the beginning, and there's several parts to that. It's a longer song. There's a lot of stuff going on in there. It's almost like it's a little prog metal in that regard because of the different direction it goes. But there's a really cool chord progression that's happening there. Really great riff that just is like, oh, that is cool. That
Are you
really,
talking about that like
together.
Dun, dun, dun. Is that the like riff you're talking about?
It's in the very beginning, yeah. And it just and it dun, 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 and it just it does a slight little different thing the second time, but it's like all right, and there's just this is just slathered in awesome riffs, which is to me is what is some of the best aspects of metal that I like, and then on top of that, throw in some crazy good guitar solos. And I know, John, you're talking about it's hard for me to tell exactly who's virtuoso, but man, there's some awesome guitar happening in here as well. That's just like insane. So,
they can all play. All the guitarists can play. Like, let me start by saying, Burton always stands out to me because you'll see in later albums, I think.
Okay.
The bass kind of disappears.
Yeah,
in certain albums, yeah.
But like Jump in the Fire had a great riff. There was I think it was No Remorse. I mean, it's just all over the place here. It's just really, really cool riffs that are happening. So that to me is what's gonna. I don't mind you being aggressive or loud or angry. I can handle all that, but you gotta couch it in something I can hang my hat on, and there's plenty of that here, which was a much harder thing for me to find in something like hardcore, although. Hetfield's vocals towards the end, there's a couple I forget which songs they are exactly, but he's screaming like and I was like, I didn't know Hetfield could scream like that, and so he clearly wasn't able to sustain that type of vocalization much longer, and I'm okay with that. Like it's okay if you do that a little bit. That's when you start to make that your bread and butter. You're going to lose me a little bit, but no, man, this was awesome. I really didn't. I probably have heard some of these songs here or there. I'm sure they played some of them at the show that I saw, but I didn't really know them to the point where I recognized them. But yeah, man, this was awesome. And I was like, oh, this has got to be up towards the top of their albums, because this is like this is the Metallica sound. And then I'm like, oh shit, it's only fifth. So Master of Puppets, Ride the Lightning, and Justice for All are all rated higher, as is the Black Album, but that's the one that I know. So I'm looking forward to next week. I'm looking forward to the other ones that we cover. This was great. I really like this.
So yeah, this one falls into the 3 strong thumbs up category, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I look forward to, once you've heard all of them, Matt, of the 80s Choice Metallica, because we're doing all of them. Maybe when we get to Justice for All, we'll summarize what we think and do our ranking.
Or rank them or whatever. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
But if you're listening to this on YouTube, know that we're doing them in order. So as you listen to this, if this is 3 months after we did it, you can just skip ahead to Justice for All, and we'll rank where all the Metallica albums fall for us. I think I'm the only one who has a knowledge of all 4 of them at this point. And so, by that time, we'll all have it. So look forward to it.